Today I wanted to talk about Jimmy Carter. I was a young broker or an FA agent. Actually, I was a customer man. And the country was, and the world actually, was hurting. We had this thing called stagflation. No one knew what to do with it. Everything was fixed in those days, something that we don't have today. So the exchange rates were fixed. And so everything would get out of whack, and then we would have runs on the currencies and the banks, and we'd have to have a conference, and then they would refix the currencies. And the same thing was done with our interest rates. There were 7 voting members of the Fed, all old white men, and they would sit around a table and they would say, hey, this is what the interest rates were. That's how it was done. So the world's economies were all in this stagflation and no one knew what to do. So when Carter came in, the first thing he did, I believe it was Schultz, he named as head of the Fed. But literally, think about this, there was a revolt on Wall Street. I mean, Wall Street was like, listen, we have real problems. We don't need a political appointee. We need a real person in there. So they went through the Fed and they were told, hey, this guy's smart. He's a background guy. And Volcker then was named as the head of the Fed. So the narrative is that Volcker raised the interest rates up to 21.5%, breaking the 14% inflation down to 3%. We had over 10% unemployment. And obviously, Jimmy Carter was not reelected president. Now, I, being a young person in the business, I was like, Jimmy Carter seems like a very nice man, but there's no way that he should be president. And in the next election, Reagan was elected in a landslide. And Jimmy Carter went off on his life, as we all know. And that was it, as far as I knew. And at that time, I voted for Reagan. I forget how long went by, 10, 15 years, and Volcker then wrote his book about his experiences. And I read it. And this is what Volcker said. Volcker said that when he got in there, he realized that human beings trying to fix rates, both on the currencies and on the interest rates, was just a no-go. And in fact, they had mapped out the massive misallocation of capital, okay? And this misallocation of capital was causing all kinds of problems throughout the economy. Things were being invested in they shouldn't have been, and things that needed money couldn't get the money. So they came up with a plan. He took his team up and he met with Carter's team, his economic team, his political team, and so forth. And he said, hey, what I'd like to do is let the interest rates kind of go where they want to go, and then we try to influence them. Obviously, we'll work with the short rates, not the long rates, which we now see today. They control the short, not the long. And I guess it got pretty animated, because Carter's political people were, you cannot allow him to do this, because if he does this, you will never be reelected president. So the meeting broke up, everyone goes away. So I forget, I think some time went by, a week or 2 weeks went by, and then Volcker got a phone call one afternoon and says, can you come to the White House tonight? And so he went up there, alone. So he went up alone. And he met with Carter, alone. And in the book, he says, one, I didn't realize how freaking smart this guy was. He was a real nuclear engineer, all right, and a hero. We had a nuclear submarine with a huge problem. I don't understand it. They needed someone to volunteer to go into the submarine and save the situation. So the nuclear reactor didn't blow up, and there was one volunteer, and it was Lieutenant Jimmy Carter. So anyway, he meets with them and he goes through and he explains the misallocation of capital again. So Carter looks at him and says, Paul, you got to tell me, is this in the best interest of the United States? And Volcker said, yes, I believe in my heart that this is absolutely in the best interest of the United States. So Carter says, okay, I got your back. You can go do it. I'm not going to fire you. I'm not going to ask you to resign. I'll go with what you want to have done. So this narrative that Volcker raised the interest rates is not true. What happened is he let the short rates run where they wanted to run, and he followed it up with the Fed funds rate, okay? He didn't set the pace. It was done through the markets. And oh, by the way, when Carter asked him, so where do you think the interest rate's going to go? He said, 8 to 10%. And they went to 21.5, okay? And unemployment went to over 10%. So in the end, what happened is that we were at 882 on the Dow, okay? 882. And if you go back and look at your long-term charts, you're going to see that we barely moved 30 or 40 points on the Dow since 1948, okay? That's an inflationary environment. And from that moment on, this happened. You can look all the way down there on the bottom on the left, 1981. That's when this whole thing happened, okay? And since then, I would say, I think it's inarguable, that the greatest wealth making, or whatever you want to call it, in the history of the world was unleashed by Jimmy Carter allowing Volcker to do what he did and supporting him. And Jimmy Carter has taken a lot of grief over this, but this is not just the United States. We then went into floating rates on our exchange rates, and you see how we work today. They go up and down every day. We don't have conferences to say you do this, we do this. Sometimes the government will, devalue their currency and so forth, but it's not done like it did in the past. And we didn't have all the runs on currencies and all this other stuff that was happening, okay? So what came out of this when Jimmy Carter allowed this was the greatest wealth creation in the history of the world for the world. Nothing is remotely close, ever. And to this day, I rue the fact that I was so uneducated, didn't understand what was going on, and made decisions based on bad data, my own personal experience and my own personal opinion, when what really happened was that Jimmy Carter, along with Paul Volcker, because Paul Volcker led him, right, said this is what we can do, created the greatest wealth machine ever in the history of the world. And he should get credit for that, and he does not. He gets credit for being a good man. So, I think it's both. I don't know. What do you think? Like and follow, and thanks for listening.